Hello, my name is Dorothy. I am 67 years old, and this story begins on a Christmas morning I will never forget. I woke up to an empty house, no laughter, no footsteps, no smell of breakfast. My son, his wife, and my grandkids had left for the Maldives without telling me. No note, no message, nothing. The silence felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for me to break. But I didn't fall apart. I stood up, brushed the sadness off my shoulders, and made a decision that surprised even me. I called a real estate agent. 10 days later, my phone buzzed nonstop 22. Missed calls from the same people who thought I would stay quietly waiting for them. And that's when everything began to change. What happened after that shook my world, exposed truths I never expected, and forced my family to face the consequences of leaving me behind. There were secrets, betrayal, justice, things I never imagined I would have the strength to confront. If you're curious to know what drove them to call me so desperately, what I discovered next, and how this single decision transformed my entire life, stay with me. But before we go any further, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your messages and knowing where you are. Now let's understand how this story really began. Christmas morning has a very specific kind of silence. Not the peaceful, snowy kind you see in movies, but a hollow silence. The kind that feels like an unanswered question floating in the air. That was the silence I woke up to. For a moment, half asleep, I thought maybe the kids were already in the living room, rustling through gift bags or whispering excitedly while trying not to wake me. I imagined my grandkids' small feet pattering against the floor, their laughter bubbling through the house the way it used to. But when I sat up, the hallway outside my bedroom looked strangely dim, as if the house itself had exhaled and gone empty. I called out softly, "Hello? Anyone up yet?" Nothing. No movement, no voices, no smell of breakfast. The silence had weight, like the air had grown thick enough to swallow every sound. I wrapped my robe around my shoulders and stepped out. The cold floor stung my feet, another reminder that something was wrong. At first, I didn't see the suitcases. I only noticed the half-open closet, the missing shoes from the front mat, the absence of Anna's winter coat on the hook, where she always left it, no matter how many times I asked her not to. Then my eyes settled on the hallway. 2 large suitcases, unzipped, carelessly abandoned as if someone had rushed through them. A pair of children's flip-flops on top, out of place in December. My breath caught. They were gone. I walked into the living room, each step heavy. The Christmas tree lights blinked quietly, unaware that they had no audience. Beneath the tree, one small gift remained wrapped neatly. To Grandma, with love. I sank to my knees and touched it. The tag wasn't in children's handwriting. It was Anna's. A chill spread through my arms. They didn't forget to bring the gift. They left it for me to find. My mind raced through reasons, emergencies, misunderstandings, last-minute changes. But then I checked the kitchen counter. The boarding passes were there, printed and stacked. Maldives. A trip planned for weeks. Without me. Without even telling me. I stood there for a long time, pressing my fingertips against my lips so I wouldn't scream. So I wouldn't let the heartbreak spill out all at once. I waited for tears to come. They didn't. What came instead was an aching clarity, like something inside me finally snapped into place. I whispered to the stillness, "This is the last time." I don't know what exactly I meant, only that something inside me refused to be humiliated again. The gift under the tree blurred in my vision as I took a deep breath and forced myself to stand. My legs trembled slightly, but I didn't sit back down. I walked to the phone, dialed the number of a real estate agent I'd met only once at a community event. She'd told me, "If you ever think of selling, call me. The market is hungry." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Hi, this is Dorothy." "Yes, that Dorothy. I need to list my house." There was a pause on her end, maybe surprise, maybe curiosity, But she kept a professional tone. Effective when? Immediately. My hands were shaking now, but it wasn't fear. It was release. The moment I hung up, I felt like the air finally shifted. Not lighter, not yet, but moving. Moving away from pain and towards something I couldn't name. The next 10 days were a blur. Showings, paperwork, signatures, questions from neighbors pretending to be concerned while greedily eyeing the for sale sign. I moved quietly, deliberately, a woman protecting her heart by refusing to let anyone near it. When the final offer came in, higher than I expected, I accepted without hesitation. Not a single call from my son, not until the house sold. That's when the phone began buzzing nonstop. At first, I ignored it, pretending I didn't hear, pretending I didn't care. But 22 missed calls later, I let the truth settle painfully inside me. He only called because something he wanted was slipping away. When I finally checked the last voicemail, his voice was frantic, angry, confused. The voice of a man accustomed to being centered, not ignored. "Mom, what have you done? Call me back. Right now. Seriously, what have you done?" I held the phone against my chest and exhaled slowly. He wasn't asking if I was okay. He wasn't asking why I sounded distant. It wasn't even asking if I wanted to spend Christmas alone. He wanted his version of me back. Silent, compliant, grateful for scraps. But that version of me was gone. I looked around the empty house, my house, the place where I raised him, where I held him as a baby, where I fixed his scraped knees and soothed his nightmares and believed in him when he stopped believing in himself. The walls echoed with memories, but none of them were enough to keep me here. "Goodbye," I whispered to the rooms, to the shadows, to the woman I used to be. Then I picked up my keys, closed the door behind me, and walked into a new life without looking back. When they finally came back, it was as if a storm entered the room before they did. The front door slammed so hard the frame trembled, and I could hear hurried footsteps, angry ones crossing the threshold. I was sitting on the small sofa in my nearly empty living room, a box of my belongings beside me, waiting for this moment with a strange mixture of dread and calm. My son walked in first, his face flushed, hair tousled from the long flight. Emily followed close behind, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitching. The kids were nowhere in sight, probably already dropped off somewhere so they wouldn't witness the confrontation. My son didn't start with a greeting. "Mom, what? Why? How could you do this?" His voice cracked between disbelief and fury. I looked at him, really looked at him. The boy I raised was buried somewhere deep within this man who stood before me, a man shaped by convenience, entitlement, and a marriage that had chipped away at his kindness little by little. I chose my words carefully. I did what I needed to. He laughed, sharp, humorless. "You sold the house, our family home, without even talking to us." I kept my hands folded to hide their slight tremor. "It was my home. And you left without talking to me." Emily scoffed loudly, stepping forward with the confidence of someone who believes she owns every room she enters. "Oh, please, that again." She tossed her hair back and walked closer, her voice dropping into that familiar, condescending tone she used whenever she wanted to cut me down without raising her volume. "You're overreacting. It was a family trip. You could have called us if you were confused." Confused? The words stung more than I expected. "I wasn't confused," I said quietly. Emily rolled her eyes. "You act like we abandoned you on purpose. You didn't come because you never come. Every time we invite you, you have some excuse. Your back hurts, the weather bothers you, you need time to recharge." She smirked while mimicking air quotes. "You're always so dramatic." My son stood silently, arms folded, letting her speak for both of them. He always let her speak. Years ago, that disappointed me. Now it simply revealed who he had chosen to be. Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice like she wanted her words to carve themselves into me. "You really think you can just run off, sell everything? Start some kind of New life? All by yourself? She let out a sharp breath, half a laugh, half a threat. You wouldn't survive a week alone. Something inside me snapped, not with anger, but with certainty. A tightening, then a release, the moment a wound stops bleeding and starts closing. I smiled, not to provoke her, not to pretend, but because for the first time in years, my heart felt steady. We're about to find out. That shut them both up for a moment. My son blinked, his face softening just a little, as if he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. Maybe I didn't either. Standing up for myself after years of quiet endurance felt like wearing a dress I had forgotten I owned familiar fabric. Strange fit. Emily recovered first, throwing her hands up. Fine, do whatever you want. Just don't come crawling back when you realize you can't handle it. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her words fell flat between us, impotent, powerless. By the time they left, slamming the door again, this time to punctuate their displeasure, the house felt heavier than ever. Not with sadness, but with finality. Every wall held memories, but they didn't belong to the present anymore. The house wasn't home. It was a museum of a life that no longer fit me. 2 days later, I turned over the keys and walked out for the last time. My new apartment downtown was small, barely big enough for the essentials, but it felt like a place where I could breathe. The windows looked out onto a bustling street where people walked dogs, carried groceries, laughed with friends, and lived lives that didn't revolve around obligation or resentment. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't the ghost in someone else's story. I was a person again. I filled the space slowly, a soft blanket, a second-hand lamp, a tiny plant that leaned toward the sun, stubborn and alive. And the sound of traffic replaced the silence of the old house, but the noise felt strangely comforting. Life was happening outside my window, and I was part of it again. A block away was the community center. I had passed it a dozen times when I lived in the old house, but never stepped inside. Now it felt like a door I was meant to walk through. The first day, I went in timidly, asking if they needed volunteers. A woman with bright eyes and tired hands smiled at me. "We always need help," she said. "You came at the perfect time." I started sorting food donations, handing out meals, sitting at tables where lonely people whispered stories they had carried for years. Every time someone thanked me, something in my chest warmed. I had forgotten how good it felt to be useful, not used, but useful. I wasn't lonely. Not anymore. Not in the way I had been inside my own family. That evening, after a long and beautiful day of feeling human again, I returned to the apartment with aching feet and a lighter heart. I didn't expect anyone to call, so when my phone buzzed in my purse, I didn't rush to pick it up. I changed into pajamas, made tea, and stood by the window watching the streetlights flicker. Flicker. Then I heard a voice. Emily's voice. It wasn't coming from inside. It was leaking through the thin hallway walls, along with the echo of her heels. They had come to the apartment building without telling me. I froze and listened. Her tone was low, sharp, dripping with venom she never bothered hiding when she thought no one could hear. "Yes, I know what I'm doing," she hissed into the phone. "By March, everything will be in my name." I felt the mug slip slightly in my hand. Everything. In her name. The apartment. My accounts. Whatever was left of my life. I stood there in the dim light, tea cooling in my hands, my heart steady again, not calm, but focused. For the first time, I realized this wasn't about hurt feelings or misunderstandings. She had a plan, and I had just stepped into a war I didn't know was being fought. The morning after hearing Emily's whispered threat through the thin hallway walls, I woke with a heaviness I couldn't shake. It wasn't fear. It was the dawning realization that something had been happening behind my back long before I ever packed my boxes or locked the door of my old house for the last time. I sat at the small kitchen table of my new apartment, the one that wobbled slightly if I leaned on it too hard, and opened my laptop. I told myself I was only checking my email, maybe reading the news. But my hands moved on their own, almost guided by instinct, typing in the login for my bank account. When the screen loaded, at first I thought it was a glitch. Then I scrolled, and scrolled again. Large sumsy thousands, then tens of thousands were gone. Withdrawn in neat intervals, as if someone had been feeding off my accounts slowly, methodically, confident I'd never notice. At the bottom of one withdrawal record was a scanned authorization form, with my signature. Except it wasn't mine. Not the handwriting I'd used on checks for decades. Not the looping D I had perfected in high school. Not the neat slant my late husband used to tease me about. This was jagged, rushed, wrong. I stared at it so long, the letters seemed to bleed into each other. The world felt suddenly off balance, like standing on a floor that wasn't finished settling. My throat tightened, not from panic, but from the betrayal dripping through every falsified stroke of ink. I felt foolish for not noticing sooner. But more than anything, I felt violated in a way I didn't have a name for. This wasn't just money. This was trust, scraped clean. A part of me wanted to slam the laptop shut, pretend it was a mistake, pretend someone else, anyone else, was responsible. But I had heard Emily's voice, the venom wrapped in calm certainty. By March, everything will be in my name. This wasn't an accident. It was a dismantling. Yet when anger finally rose in my chest, it was cold, contained. Not a wildfire, but a deliberate flame, controlled, focused. If they wanted a quiet, helpless woman, they had chosen the wrong person. At the community center that afternoon, I walked through the busy hallway with a strange sense of purpose. My hands shook a little as I held the printed bank statements, but I held them anyway. The woman at the front desk noticed my expression, her brows knitting softly, and pointed me toward a small office at the end of the hall. "He's free right now," she whispered. "Go on in." Inside, a young man sat behind a cluttered desk, sleeves rolled up, dark curls slightly disheveled. He looked too young to carry the weight of other people's crises, but the moment he glanced up, I saw something steady in his eyes. "Hi," he said, standing to shake my hand. "I'm Daniel. How can I help?" I hesitated, suddenly aware of how small my voice felt compared to everything I needed to say, but I forced myself to speak. I think someone has been stealing from me." I placed the papers in front of him. He read silently, his expression shifting from curiosity to concentration to something much darker. When he reached the forged signature, his jaw tightened. He looked up slowly. "How long has this been happening?" "I don't know." "I didn't check." My voice wavered and I hated myself for it. I trusted them. He nodded gently, as if the admission wasn't something to be ashamed of, but something painfully human. "You're not the first mother they've done this to," he said softly. "People get comfortable. Families take advantage. It's more common than you think." The word struck me hard. Not because he meant to hurt me, but because he understood. Because he said mother, not client. For the first time since seeing the withdrawals, my eyes burned. I blinked, swallowing the ache. "What do we do?" I asked. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice, even though the door was closed. "We gather everything, quietly. Every document, every email, every authorization form. Make copies. Bring them here. Don't confront them yet." The air in the room felt heavier, but in a way that made me straighten my spine rather than collapse under it. "They'll never see it coming," I said. A small smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. "Good! You deserve justice. And frankly," he tapped the forged signature with his pen, "they deserve to be caught." We spent the next hour organizing the plan. What to print? What to request from the bank? What to photograph? Daniel was calm, methodical, and patient. Every time I hesitated, he waited. Every time my voice cracked, he lowered his own, easing the weight. When I walked out of his office, something in me felt steadier. I wasn't alone in this. And more importantly, I wasn't powerless. The days that followed were a blur of quiet collection. I became a shadow of myself, but in a purposeful way, moving through my routines with watchful eyes, careful hands. I gathered statements, emails, old documents my husband had kept. Anything that could show the pattern forming beneath the surface of our family life. Every page carried a new sting. Every detail hinted at a betrayal deeper than I had guessed. At night, I replayed conversations in my mind. The little remarks I'd brushed off, the hints I'd ignored, the way Emily always insisted on handling the complicated paperwork, or how my son had begun pushing me to sign things without reading them to save time. I didn't want to believe I had raised someone capable of this. But denial was a luxury I no longer allowed myself. Not now, not with everything at stake. One cold evening, after volunteering at the community center, I returned home to find the hallway unusually quiet. No footsteps, no murmured conversations through walls. Just the hum of the building and my own breathing. I opened my mailbox casually, expecting a flyer or perhaps a delayed holiday card. Instead, a single envelope sat inside. Thick, cream-colored, formal. When I saw the return address, my stomach tightened painfully. A law office. My hands shook as I tore it open right there in the hallway. The words blurred at first, the legal jargon forming a tangled mass. I forced myself to read them slowly, one line at a time. The air left my lungs. I was being sued for abandonment. By my own son. For a moment, the building tilted around me. I steadied myself against the wall, the envelope slipping slightly from my fingers. Abandonment. As if I had left him. As if I had walked away from years of loving him, supporting him, holding him when his heart broke, cheering for him when he didn't believe in himself. A legal accusation, crafted with cold precision. It wasn't just an attack. It was preparation. They were moving faster than I thought. And the war I hadn't asked for had just taken a devastating turn. When I first read the word abandonment, something inside me broke in a way I didn't have language for. It didn't feel like anger or even grief. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and quietly unspooled every memory, every sacrifice, every moment I had given of myself carefully, lovingly, and tossed them aside like scraps. Abandonment. As if I had ever turned my back on my own child. As if I hadn't been the one left standing alone while they stripped pieces of my life away. I sat on my couch, the letter trembling in my hands. The apartment around me was dark, except for the soft orange glow of the street lamp outside my window. The silence made everything sharper, the faint buzz of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, the uneven rhythm of my own breathing. After everything I gave them, I whispered into the emptiness as if the walls themselves could understand. My voice cracked on the last word. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the accusation like it might change if I reread it enough times. There was no kindness in the wording, no hesitation. Just a cold, calculated attempt to strip me of dignity and paint me as someone I had never been. It wasn't just a legal threat. It was a story they were rewriting. One where I was the villain, and that hurt more than anything else. The next morning, I walked into the community center carrying the letter in a manila folder, though it felt heavier than any paper should. People noticed right away. My smile must have faltered, or maybe sadness has a way of settling into the shoulders no matter how hard you try to hold yourself straight. Marlene was the first to reach me. She was sitting at a round table near the window, knitting something in a shade of soft lavender. Her hands were frail but steady, her eyes kind in a way life had taught her to be. "Dorothy?" she asked, tilting her head. "Honey, you look pale. What happened?" I sat beside her, placing the folder on the table. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I didn't want to cry in front of her, but emotion pressed against my throat like a hand. Marlene reached over and gently touched my wrist. "You can tell me." I nodded, forcing out a shaky breath. "They're suing me. My son. For abandonment." Her knitting needles stilled. Slowly, she set them down, her eyes widening not with gossip, but with genuine heartbreak. "Oh, Dorothy," she whispered. No, no, that's not right. Not you." I didn't trust my voice, so I just looked at her, hoping she could see the truth in my silence. She squeezed my wrist again, firmer this time. "You have a heart of gold," she said. "Anyone who knows you sees that. You gave that boy everything. Everything. Time to show them who you really are." Tears stung my eyes, hot and sudden. Not from pain this time, but from the rare comfort of someone merely seeing me without the shadows cast by betrayal. The others joined us soon after. People I'd only known for a few weeks. People who didn't owe me anything but offered warmth anyway. They listened, they held my hands, they told stories of their own heartbreaks. The room became something sacred, not because of the walls, but because of the hearts inside it. Later, I walked into Daniel's small office, my determination burning beneath the grief. He looked up from his desk, immediately reading my expression. "What happened?" he asked. I handed him the letter. His eyebrows tightened as he read. A muscle in his jaw pulsed. When he finished, he set it down with a heavy sigh. "This is aggressive," he said. "They're trying to box you in legally, make you look unstable or irresponsible." I swallowed hard. "I know. But it's not working," he added firmly, "because you didn't abandon anyone." Something about the certainty in his tone made my chest loosen. He wasn't trying to comfort me. He was stating a fact. "We'll respond immediately," Daniel continued. "Not just with a defense, with a countersuit. Financial exploitation, fraud, forgery. We have enough evidence to make this very uncomfortable for them." I nodded. "Good. I don't want to destroy them. I want justice. I want the truth on paper." Daniel's gaze softened. "That's not revenge, Dorothy. That's survival." We worked for hours, going through documents, building timelines, drafting statements. Every click of his keyboard felt like stitching myself back together, piece by piece. He showed me where to sign, where to initial, where to let my voice be firm and clear instead of trembling. When we were finally done, he leaned back in his chair. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. I looked at him, surprised. "I don't feel strong." "You don't have to feel it," he said. "You're proving it." The walk back to my apartment that evening felt different. My steps were slow but grounded, each one a reminder that I wasn't disappearing the way they hoped. I had people behind me, a voice, a path. Night fell quickly, the air crisp enough to make my breath fog as I climbed the stairs to my floor. I reached my door, keys in hand, when a sudden knock startled me. A man stood there, a stranger, tall, with tired eyes, and a stack of papers under his arm. He removed his cap politely. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but respectful. "You Dorothy?" "Yes," I answered, gripping my keys a little tighter. He held out a single document. "I'm not here for trouble. Someone asked me to deliver this, said it's important you see it." I took the paper cautiously. My eyes scanned the first lines, and the world seemed to tilt again, but not with confusion this time, with disbelief, with rage, with the cold clarity of betrayal reaching its next stage. Because printed on the page, bold as a billboard, were the words, "Property listing your address for sale, my house, my home, on the market." Again, I lifted my eyes slowly to the man, the page trembling between my fingers. "Ma'am," he said gently, "you might want to see this. Your house is on the market again." And the night closed around us, heavy with the truth. They weren't done. But neither was I. I didn't recognize the voice I was using when I said the words. "They're selling my old house." It came out thin, almost breathless, as if the shock had reached inside my chest and squeezed my ribs together. I stood in the tiny kitchen of my apartment, the document still trembling between my fingers, my eyes scanning those cold sentences again and again. They weren't just selling it, they were presenting me as mentally unfit, incapable of handling my own life. Unfit. That word wrapped around me like a rope pulled tight. For a moment, I couldn't move. I thought of that house, the sunlit kitchen where I baked bread every Sunday, the doorway where my son took his first steps, the garden I tended for decades. Every memory felt like glass shattering under my feet. "So that's their plan," I whispered. It sounded like someone else speaking, someone older, someone tired, someone standing on the edge of a cliff with the wind pushing her forward. I forced myself to sit, focusing on the rhythm of my breathing. I felt anger spreading through me, not like a sudden fire, but like slow, rolling, heat-steady, determined. This was no longer about heartbreak. This was about survival. This was about dignity. By the next morning, I was at the community center earlier than usual. Daniel noticed the redness around my eyes before I even said a word. He closed his laptop gently and motioned for me to sit. "Talk to me," he said softly. I handed him the document. He read it slowly, jaw tightening, and by the time he finished, he let out a long exhale. "They're escalating." "Escalating?" I repeated, as if the word were foreign. He nodded. "If they manage to sell the house under a pretense of mental incompetence, they can take everything: retirement funds, property, control of all your accounts, and my rights," I said quietly. He didn't deny it. A silence stretched between us. He wasn't rushing me. He wasn't feeding me false hope. He was simply present, something my own family had stopped being long ago. "Dorothy," he finally said, leaning forward, "I'm gonna ask you something delicate. Are you ready to fight them publicly? Not just legally?" I lifted my gaze to him. "I'm not afraid of truth." He held my eyes for a moment longer, then nodded slowly as if I had just confirmed something important. "Then let's take them apart piece by piece." We spent the next hours reviewing documents, cross-referencing dates, searching for inconsistencies. My hands shook as I flipped through pages. Bank statements, forged signatures, false transactions. The medical report Emily had submitted to justify the claim that I was mentally declining. That one hit me like a punch to the stomach. "It's fake," Daniel said, with that focused intensity he used when he was assembling evidence. "I can already tell. Wrong formatting, mismatched reference numbers, and the physician's signature doesn't match registered samples." I knew she was manipulative, I whispered, "but this is cruelty." He nodded with a sadness that surprised me. People like Emily don't start with cruelty. They start with convenience. Then, convenience becomes entitlement. And entitlement becomes violence, even if it isn't physical. I swallowed back the sting in my throat. She was supposed to be my family. "That's why it hurts," he said quietly. I looked down at my hands. They didn't look weak. They didn't look like the hands of someone unfit. They looked like the hands of a woman who had survived too much to let her life be erased. "Dorothy," he said gently, "you don't deserve this, and you're stronger than you think." His words filled the room like warm light, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift inside me. My heartbreak didn't disappear, but it changed shape, became sharper, more defined, like a blade instead of an open wound. "Daniel," I said, my voice low, steady, "I don't want to win quietly." He blinked, unsure what I meant. "I don't want this to be sealed away in a courtroom, hidden in files. Whispered about," I continued. "Women like me go through this every day, and nobody hears us. Nobody sees us." He straightened. The look he gave me wasn't surprise, was respect. "What are you thinking?" I inhaled deeply, the decision forming inside me like a sunrise. "I want the truth to come out in front of everyone. Not just the town, not just the family, everyone." He hesitated, then asked, "Dorothy, how many people are you talking about?" I looked him directly in the eyes. "National television." The words settled heavily in the room. I watched them land on him, watched him process them, weigh them, consider the risk. And then slowly, he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, studying me with renewed admiration. "You're serious," he said softly. Very. He nodded once. Then we'll need to build something airtight, something undeniable. We will, I replied. Because they think I'm too old to fight, too fragile, too easy to silence. Daniel's voice lowered. They don't know you at all. I felt a tightness in my chest, part ache, part pride. A tear slipped down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. It wasn't weakness. It was release. The rest of the day passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Phone calls, drafts, strategy. Every moment felt like rebuilding a piece of myself that they had tried to destroy. When I returned to my apartment that night, the sky outside was a deep, calming blue. I stood by the window with the lights off, watching the faint glow of the city, feeling the quiet settle around me. My life had shrunk into this small apartment, but somehow I felt bigger than I ever had in my own house. They wanted to paint me as unfit, yet they were the ones who feared the truth. They wanted to take everything from me, yet I was the one finding myself again. And as I stood there, hands resting on the windowsill, I whispered into the dark, "You're not going to win." A calm certainty settled inside me. I would expose them, I would reclaim my life, and I would do it in a way no one, especially Emily, ever expected. The cliffhanger came quietly, not as a shock, but as a realization that felt like stepping through a doorway. I wasn't just going to fight them. I was going to show the world who I truly was. I never imagined my life would intersect with television cameras, studio lights, or national audiences, but life has a way of dragging you into places you never planned to stand, especially when the truth demands a stage big enough to hold it. It was Daniel who first opened that door. He leaned across the table one afternoon, a faint, almost mischievous glimmer in his eyes. "I think I know someone who can help," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Help? How?" He took out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "My friend Melissa works for Morning Beacon. You've probably seen it. One of those talk shows that blends laughter with sudden emotional ambushes. They love human stories. And Injustice." He exhaled softly, giving me a knowing look. "Injustice has ratings." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The idea of exposing my family on national television felt surreal, almost theatrical. Yet the more I thought about it, the more right it felt. They had stolen my money, forged my name, labeled me unfit, tried to sell my home, and now they were preparing to paint me as a mother who abandoned her own child. If they were so proud of their lies, they could answer for them in front of the world. Melissa called the next morning. Her voice was warm, enthusiastic, bubbling with the kind of energy that fills studios at dawn. "Dorothy, I've heard bits of your story. I'm so sorry for everything you've been through. And I'll be honest, it's powerful. It's heartbreaking, and it needs to be seen." Her words poured through the phone like a gentle tide. I wasn't used to strangers being immediately on my side. "What would you want from me?" I asked. She hesitated, but only a little. "We are planning an intervention episode. The idea is that families come together for reconciliation. Tears, apologies, breakthroughs, all of that. Your family would think that's why they're coming. And what is the real purpose?" I asked quietly. "To give you a platform," she said, her voice steady. "To show what has truly been happening. To confront them with the evidence. To reclaim your narrative." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I don't want revenge," I whispered. "I want the truth and justice. And you'll have both," she promised, "if you're ready." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Ready? I didn't know if anyone could ever be ready for something like that, but I had already lost too much. My dignity, however, was not something I was willing to sacrifice. "I'll do it," I said. The days that followed became a whirlwind of preparation. Calls, pre-interviews, discussions with producers. They wanted to know everything, how the lies began, how the betrayal unfolded, the stolen money, the forged signature, the accusations of abandonment, the false claims about my mental health. As I recounted each piece, I felt both exhausted and strangely lighter, as if telling it aloud removed tiny fragments of the weight I'd been carrying. One producer, a man named Joseph with soft eyes and a constant pen between his fingers, listened to me like every word mattered. At one point, after I had described the forged medical documents, he pressed his lips together tightly. "They did this to your own mother," he murmured. "People need to hear this." I nodded, wiping a tear I hadn't meant to let fall. "People like me aren't rare," I said. "We're just quiet." On the morning of the taping, I woke long before sunrise. I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. For the first time in months, I didn't see a wounded woman. I saw someone rising. Someone who had been pushed down so many times that standing up now felt like defiance. One chose a royal blue suit. The color made my eyes look brighter, my shoulders stronger. My hairdresser swept my hair into soft waves, framing my face in a way that felt polished but still me. I added simple pearl earrings, the same pair I had worn on my wedding day, years before life had become so complicated. They reminded me that dignity existed long before betrayal, and it still belonged to me. When I walked into the studio, heads turned. Not because I was glamorous, but because I looked whole, composed, brave, ready. A woman, not a victim. Melissa met me with a hug. "You look incredible," she whispered. "And you're going to change lives today." I smiled faintly. Let's hope I change mine first. Backstage was a maze of wires, makeup chairs, screens flickering with countdown timers, people rushing with clipboards and headsets. Voices echoed, laughter mixed with rehearsed lines, the murmur of a show waking up. Joseph guided me to a quiet corner. "Here's how it will go," he said, flipping through his notes. "Your family believes this is an episode about forgiveness, you all reuniting, healing old wounds. They'll be expecting hugs, tears, warm stories." A sharp pain tightened in my stomach. Forgiveness? They wanted forgiveness for what they hadn't even admitted. "And what about the truth?" I asked softly. "That's where you come in," he said, his voice almost reverent. "You'll have the floor. All the documents we prepared are ready. Your segment will begin with a simple question. Why are we here today? And you'll take it from there." My pulse quickened. I clasped my hands together to steady them, and my family. "Are they here yet?" I asked. Joseph pressed 2 fingers to his earpiece, listening to a producer speaking somewhere across the room. Then he turned to me, his expression shifting in a way that made me inhale sharply. "They just arrived." My breath caught. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt slightly, as if the air changed shape around me. "They're signing release forms," he continued gently. "And Dorothy, they truly believe this is a forgiveness special." Those words hit me like a cold wave. They walked into this place expecting applause for showing up, expecting to be painted as caring children repairing a family bond, expecting me to smile at them, thank them, embrace them, as though none of the pain had ever happened. My heart pounded hard enough that I felt it in my fingertips. Forgiveness special. They had come completely unprepared, and the truth was waiting on the other side of a curtain. "Are you all right?" Joseph asked. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm more than all right." I was ready. The bright studio lights softened everything, turning the edges of the room into a hazy blur. The cameras rolled silently, their red tally lights flickering like watchful eyes. I felt the slight vibration of the stage beneath my heels, the faint hum of cables, the distant rustle of audience members settling into their seats. And then I saw them, my family walking toward me. My son approached first, his steps hesitant, almost rehearsed. When he reached me, he pulled me into a hug that felt more like a gesture for the cameras than anything meant for me. His arms barely wrapped around my shoulders, his chin hovering above my hair as if afraid to touch too much. I inhaled deeply, searching for the familiar scent of my boy, My little boy who once clung to my legs at the supermarket, afraid of losing sight of me. But all I smelled now was expensive cologne and tension. "Hi, Mom," he whispered stiffly into my ear. "Hello, sweetheart," I replied, though the word sweetheart tasted bittersweet. Emily stood a step behind him, smiling with a polished confidence that made my skin prickle. It was the kind of smile that didn't touch the eyes, a smile that was all performance, all teeth. Her lips curved upward, perfectly glossed, perfectly shaped. But there was something sharp beneath it, like a fox pretending to be tamed. "Dorothy," she said, her voice sugary, almost mocking. I nodded politely. She didn't deserve more than that. The host entered the stage with the practiced stride of someone who had comforted crying guests and confronted nervous liars for years. Her smile was warm, but purposeful, her presence grounding. She sat across from us, her cue cards resting lightly on her lap. "Welcome back," she said to the audience. Then she turned to us. "We're here today with a family in deep pain. But today, we begin with something important." She paused, letting the silence settle like dust. "Let's start with the truth." A murmur fluttered across the studio. My pulse quickened. My throat tightened. I folded my hands in my lap, feeling the faint tremor in my fingers. The host tilted her head, her voice softer now. "Dorothy, the floor is yours." Those words echoed inside me. The floor is yours. After months of being dismissed, silenced, minimized, I was suddenly being handed a platform larger than anything I'd ever imagined. I exhaled slowly and turned toward the massive screen behind us. The audience followed my gaze. Even my son looked confused, glancing between me and the blank monitor as though expecting a slideshow of family photos. But I knew what was coming. Daniel had prepared everything: the documents, the recordings, the bank statements, the forged signatures, the fake medical evaluations Emily had created to declare me mentally unfit, the proof of my stolen money, the realtors preparing to list my house without my knowledge, even clips of phone calls I had legally recorded. Every piece of my pain had been gathered with care, arranged like a series of truths waiting to break open. The first image appeared. A bank statement. Large withdrawals I never made. Then a check with my signature crudely traced. Gasps rose from the audience like a wave. People leaned forward, whispering, hands flying to their mouths. Another document flashed on the screen. Emily's fake medical evaluation, claiming I was confused, forgetful, incapable of managing my own life. Then, a recording played. Emily's voice, sharp and irritated. "She won't survive alone. By March, everything will be in my name. She won't even know what hit her." The studio erupted in stunned murmurs. Someone in the front row whispered, "My God." Emily's smile wavered. I saw her jaw tighten, her pupils widen, her breath hitch. My son's face drained of color. The next clip played, a voice message from him. "Mom, just sign the papers. Emily knows what she's doing." I watched him flinch as he heard his own voice echo through the studio. The weight of the truth pressed on him like a collapsing building. The host turned to me slowly, shock flickering across her features. "Dorothy, this is overwhelming." I nodded. "It's my reality." My voice sounded steadier than my heartbeat felt. I wasn't trembling anymore. I felt grounded, anchored by truth itself. As the documents kept rolling, the audience shifted uncomfortably, their empathy thick in the air like humidity before a storm. People weren't just watching a show, they were witnessing a woman reclaim her voice. Emily's composure cracked. First a twitch in her lip, then her hand trembling against her thigh. Her breathing became quick and shallow. You set me up!" she hissed under her breath, though it wasn't low enough. A few microphones caught it. I didn't respond. The truth was its own answer. Then, as another document flashed proof she had forged my signature to change the title of my house, Emily's face went pale, her eyes rolling upward, and she fainted. It happened so fast, the studio gasped in unison. A crew member rushed to her side, calling for water. My son stood, startled, unsure whether to help her or keep staring at the screen where his sins played for all to see. For a moment, everything slowed. Emily lay on the ground, the cameras capturing the chaos, the audience buzzing like a hive shaken suddenly. My son turned slowly toward me, his face pale, his eyes wide with something between fear and disbelief. He leaned in, his voice barely audible. "Mom, please, stop this." The words pierced me cleanly like a blade. Not "I'm sorry." Not "we were wrong." Not "how can I fix this?" Just stop. Stop telling the truth. Stop revealing what they did. Stop defending myself. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in my life I saw him not as my child, but as a man who had chosen comfort over conscience. A man who wanted the lie to continue because the lie benefited him. My heart didn't break. Not this time. It hardened. I straightened in my chair. "No," I whispered, and the cameras kept rolling. The studio was impossibly quiet after my son whispered those words. Quiet in a way that made every breath feel like a choice. Emily was still being attended to on the floor. The host sat frozen in her chair. And the camera, always watching, tilted toward me with a slow, mechanical sigh. Somewhere behind the lights, the audience sat in stunned silence, the kind that presses against your skin. I lifted my chin and looked straight into the camera lens, letting the whole weight of the moment settle in my chest before I spoke. I could see my own reflection inside that little circle of glass, small, trembling, but also resolute. No mother deserves to be betrayed by her own blood. The words left me quietly, but they traveled through the room like a shockwave. A ripple of gasps and whispered "oh my gods" floated from the audience. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't angry. I was simply telling the truth. And there was something about that truth, soft but unbreakable, that struck deeper than rage ever could. The host leaned forward slowly, her voice gentle but trembling with empathy. She had interviewed hundreds of mothers, fathers, families torn apart, but I could see in her eyes that something in my story was hitting her personally. Maybe she saw someone she loved in me. Maybe she saw herself. "Dorothy," she said softly, "after everything you've endured, after everything that has happened, what do you want now?" The question hung in the air, settling over me like a warm, fragile blanket. What did I want? For months that answer had been twisted by pain, weighed down by fear. But now, in front of all these people, I felt clarity rising in me like slow dawn breaking over a dark sea. I breathed in, steady and calm. "Peace," I said, "and justice." My voice trembled on the word peace, but steadied on justice. I felt that shift inside my body, like one part of me was still grieving the mother I had once been, gentle and giving, while another part was stepping forward. Stronger, sharper, unwilling to be dismissed again. Across from me, Daniel sat straighter, his eyes shining not with pride, but with relief that I had finally spoken what he had hoped I would claim for myself all along. The young lawyer who had taken my case for free now wore the expression of a man watching a client reclaim her life. The host turned to him, giving him the floor. "Daniel," she said, "can you help us understand what happens next? Legally speaking." He cleared his throat softly. He wasn't used to cameras or bright lights or millions of eyes waiting for him to speak. But he was steady, respectful, almost protective of me as he spoke. "Of course," he said. "After reviewing all of the evidence, financial fraud, identity forgery, medical document fabrication, my office has taken the necessary steps to ensure Mrs. Walker's assets are secured." There was a murmur across the audience. He continued, speaking with measured calm. "I'm pleased to announce, on air, that all stolen assets are being returned to her custody effective immediately." The audience erupted not with cheers, but with a raw sound somewhere between relief and outrage, like witnessing justice for the first time after thinking it might not come at all. People clapped through their shock. Others shook their heads at the horror of it, while some simply held their hands over their hearts. I felt my breath catch, a sudden ache rising in my chest. I had known this announcement was coming. Daniel had told me backstage, but hearing it spoken aloud, on live television, felt different. It felt like someone had placed a key into my hand for a door I thought was permanently locked. Daniel wasn't finished, and he said slowly, "Legal charges will follow." Gasps. A collective inhale. Someone in the front row whispered, "Good." Another person murmured, "About time." My son stiffened beside me. His hands curled into tight fists, and he began shaking his head slightly, as if trying to deny reality. But reality was right there on screen, printed in ink and audio recordings, shining under the studio lights. I could feel the warmth of the lights on my skin, the subtle vibration of the cameras turning toward my reaction. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking about the cameras, or the audience, or even the millions watching at home. I was thinking about the version of myself who had once believed that love would protect me, that motherhood by itself guaranteed loyalty. I mourned her, but I didn't want her back. Not anymore. The host placed her cue cards gently onto her lap, as if the moment no longer required a script. She looked at me, eyes warm with respect. "Dorothy, how do you feel?" I closed my eyes briefly. A single tear slipped down my cheek. Not from sadness, but from an overwhelming sense of release. Like a door inside my chest had finally opened. "I feel free," I whispered. A soft wave of applause broke out, tentative at first, then stronger, anchored in compassion rather than spectacle. It wasn't for a performance. It was for a woman they had watched fight her way back to herself. Minutes later, the cameras cut. The lights dimmed slightly. Producers rushed onto the stage, checking on Emily, guiding my son to a side corner, murmuring to each other about schedules and segments and follow-ups. The world around me spun in quick, frantic circles, but I stood still in the center of it, breathing deeply, letting the moment settle into my bones. That night, the episode aired across the country. By morning, it had gone viral. Clips of me looking into the camera, my voice steady as I said, "No mother deserves to be betrayed by her own blood," were everywhere. Millions watched me stand tall. Millions shared it, commented on it, debated it, cried with it. Strangers sent messages saying they felt seen, heard, validated. And for the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't invisible. When I stepped outside the next morning, the air felt different. Crisp, sharp, charged with a strange kind of electricity that prickled against my skin. At first, I didn't understand why the streets seemed unusually busy, why flashes of light glimmered like tiny lightning strikes across the sidewalk. Then I heard it, my name shouted from somewhere in the blur. "Dorothy! Dorothy, over here! Please, just a moment." Reporters, at least a dozen of them. They crowded at the entrance of my building, leaning forward with microphones extended like spears made of metal and foam. Cameras hovered in front of their faces, red dots blinking, catching every breath I took. Signs were taped to the railings, "The grandma who fought back." I stared at the words, stunned at how quickly the world had transformed my private pain into a public anthem. Someone stepped closer, speaking over the others. "Dorothy, how does it feel to expose your own family on national television?" Another voice followed, softer, more curious than demanding. "Do you regret anything? Do you feel vindicated?" I opened my mouth, but my voice caught. Not because I was afraid, but because I still wasn't used to being seen. Truly seen. Not as a fragile woman or a burden or a confused mother who should sit down and stay quiet, but as someone who had stood tall at a moment when everything inside her wanted to collapse. I finally managed a small nod. "I'm taking things one day at a time." The reporters surged closer, but one of the building security guards stepped in, raising a hand to keep them back. I whispered a thank you and slipped past the chaos, my heart pounding. Inside the lobby, the noise faded behind thick glass doors, but the pressure in my chest lingered. Fame, unexpected, uninvited fame, had arrived at my doorstep, and I didn't know how to feel about it. Part of me wanted to crawl back into bed, pull the covers over my head, and pretend the world wasn't watching. Another part felt a quiet spark of pride, fragile but real, like the flame of a candle fighting against wind. My phone buzzed again and again as I waited for the elevator. Texts from strangers, emails from journalists, a message from a woman in Ohio saying she cried when she saw me speak. A man in Florida saying his mother went through the same thing but never got justice. A young nurse thanking me for standing up for seniors everywhere. I held the phone to my chest for a moment, overwhelmed. These people didn't know me, yet they understood my pain more intimately than my own son had. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and there he was, my son. He looked small inside the metal box, shoulders slumped, hands clasped together as if he'd been rehearsing something. When he lifted his head and saw me, his eyes were red, either from crying or from lack of sleep. I couldn't tell. Maybe both. Mom. The word cracked. Actually, cracked. Like something breaking open inside him. He stepped out with hesitant feet, and for the first time in a long while, I saw my little boy, not the grown man who had betrayed me, not the husband who had chosen convenience and selfishness over integrity, but the child who used to tug at my skirt and say, "Mommy, look at me." "I'm so sorry," he whispered. His voice trembled. "I said things I shouldn't have. I believed lies I should have questioned. Hurt you. I know that. I know I can't take it back." My eyes pricked with heat. Forgiveness does strange things to the soul it frees. It softens, but it also reminds. Memories rose like ghosts behind my ribs. Birthday cakes with crooked frosting, late-night fevers I rocked him through, scraped knees I kissed, first heartbreaks I comforted. And then papers shoved in front of me, signatures forged, whispers behind closed doors, his cold gaze when he told me I needed help. I inhaled slowly. "Daniel," I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. "I can't pretend none of this happened. I can't ignore it or sweep it under a rug because it's uncomfortable. What you did, it broke something, and I'm not sure if we'll ever go back to what we were." His chin quivered. "I know." A long silence stretched between us, not empty silence, but full of all the things we weren't ready to say yet. "I forgive you," I finally said. He blinked hard, a single tear slipping down his cheek. "You do?" "Yes, but not for you." My throat tightened. "For me. Holding on to pain is like trying to drink poison and hoping someone else gets sick. I want to be free, Daniel. Free from the weight of what you and Emily did. Free from resentment. Free to live the rest of my life without bitterness." He nodded slowly, his expression collapsing into something raw, unbearably human. He reached out, but he didn't touch me not until I gave a small nod. Then he hugged me, gentle at first, then tighter, as if afraid I'd disappear. "I want to be better," he whispered into my shoulder. "I hope you will be," I answered softly. After he left, I stood in the lobby alone, the echo of his words drifting away like smoke. Forgiveness wasn't a magic wand. It didn't fix the past. But it did something quieter, something softer. It loosened the chains around my own heart. When I finally stepped back outside, the reporters had thinned out, though a few remained. One young woman with a camera approached timidly. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "America is calling you the grandma who fought back. How do you feel about that?" I smiled, small but genuine. "I didn't fight back," I said. "I stood up. There's a difference." She nodded thoughtfully and stepped aside. That afternoon, after the noise calmed, an unexpected email landed in my inbox. A wealthy investor, someone who had watched the episode, someone who had been moved beyond words, wanted to partner with me to build something new, something that would help others like me. A foundation dedicated to justice for the elderly, protection, advocacy, education, legal support. a way to make sure no one else suffered in silence. I pressed a hand over my heart as I read the message. The possibility felt unreal, like a door opening into a room I never knew existed, filled with light I never thought I'd see again. A foundation. My story might become someone else's lifeline. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt something blooming in my chest. Purpose. A cliffhanger, yes, but also a beginning. 1 year later, I found myself standing in front of a mirror, smoothing the fabric of the same royal blue suit that had become unexpectedly iconic. The color had taken on new meaning since that day on live television, but back then, I had worn it to remind myself that I was still a woman, still whole, still deserving of dignity. Now, as I traced the line of the lapel with quiet fingers, I realized it had become something else entirely, a symbol of survival, of voice, of reclaiming my own narrative in a world that had tried to silence me. My reflection looked different too. Not younger. My hair was streaked with more silver than before, and fine lines still curved around my eyes. But something in my expression had changed, softened yet strengthened, like tempered glass forged in fire. I breathed in slowly, letting the moment settle inside my chest. The charity gala was held in a grand ballroom downtown, all gold and crystal, soft amber light glimmering across polished floors. Banners with the foundation's name hung from the walls, each one carrying a message of hope for elderly justice. A year ago, this foundation had been nothing more than an idea scribbled in an email. Now, it had offices, volunteers, lawyers, counselors, an entire network dedicated to protecting people who had nowhere else to turn. I walked into the ballroom, and applause rippled through the air like a warm tide. "There she is," someone whispered. "Dorothy Carter." The words no longer made me shrink or flinch. I lifted my chin and let my steps fall steady and unhurried. Faces blurred around me, strangers offering smiles, survivors nodding in quiet respect, supporters reaching out as I passed. And then, my eyes found them. My son stood near the front of the audience, his hands clasped tightly, his face open and emotional. His 2 children, my grandchildren, sat beside him, both bouncing slightly in their seats as if they couldn't contain their excitement. The sight struck me with unexpected force. For a brief heartbeat, the noise faded, the lights dimmed, and all I could see were the 3 of them, clapping just for me. My son's eyes shone with something fragile and sincere. Gratitude, pride, and maybe a lingering ache that might never fully heal. But we had built something new between us, slowly, carefully, with boundaries that protected us both. Trust repaired with quiet moments, not grand gestures. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The host called my name and I stepped onto the stage. An award rested on the podium, a crystal sculpture shaped like a flame, honoring courage and resilience. Applause filled the room again, gentle but thunderous in its warmth. When the host handed me the microphone, I felt the weight of the past years settle on my shoulders, not heavy, but substantial, like a cloak woven from every tear, every apology, every sleepless night, every triumph. "Dorothy," the host said softly, "what kept you going? What helped you rise when so many would have been crushed?" I took a breath and let my eyes scan the room. So many faces, so many stories behind those faces. Pain hidden under polished shoes and elegant gowns. Strength wrapped in shawls and suits. People who had come not just to celebrate me, but to reclaim something in themselves. What kept me going, I said, my voice steady but warm, was the realization that kindness needs boundaries. That love without respect isn't love, it's control or fear or convenience dressed up as devotion. A hush fell across the room. I saw a woman dab at her eyes. A man squeezed his partner's hand. A volunteer from the foundation nodded slowly, knowingly. I learned, I continued, that forgiveness doesn't mean allowing someone back into your life without question. It means freeing yourself from the weight of their choices. It means choosing peace without abandoning self-respect. My voice wavered for a second, just a second, when I looked at my son. "Sometimes," I said softly, "the bravest thing you can do is stand for yourself, even when the people you love most don't stand with you. Especially then." The audience rose to their feet. A standing ovation, not the explosive kind with whistles and cheers, but a grounded, heartfelt one. The kind that vibrates in the bones and makes the heart swell painfully. When the applause quieted and the lights dimmed, I stepped off the stage. Shadows stretched across the hallway outside the ballroom, the soft murmur of guests drifting behind me. I pressed a hand over my heart, feeling its steady beat, feeling the life pulsing through me. And then a hand reached out and grabbed mine. It wasn't rough, just urgent. I turned, startled, and saw a woman mid-60s, trembling slightly, her eyes wide with fear and desperation. Her makeup had smudged as if she'd cried earlier or was fighting not to cry now. "Dorothy!" she whispered, her voice cracking on my name. "They did the same to me. My children. My own children. Please, please, help me." Something inside me shifted, expanded, lit up with purpose. Her grip tightened, not painfully, but with such fragile hope that it felt like holding a bird with a broken wing. I squeezed her hand back, steady and reassuring. "You're not alone," I whispered. "Not anymore. We'll get through this together." Her shoulders slumped as a soft sob escaped her. I guided her toward a quieter corner, ready to listen, ready to help, ready to be the voice she needed. The voice she needed, too. As I walked with her, I realized how far I had come, how far I still had to go. Not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as a woman with a story powerful enough to open doors for others. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you feel seen in any way, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and stay with me for more journeys of courage, healing, and rebirth.